Hello everyone and most welcome to H755. And today we're going to talk about the brain and its marvelous character. A human brain is a very strange thing indeed. And we have a specific system to take care of this very, very different organ when we look at the animal kingdom. And this is called homeostasis. And that's the field of proper functioning. Sometimes it's also called affection. So what could lurk behind these expressions? Well, the human brain is indeed special. It actually consumes up to 60% of our energy. And that makes it incredibly energy consuming, big part of our metabolic system and the most important part without a doubt. And to put this in perspective, we have a second comer here with 9% of the metabolic system, which is also very rare for the animal kingdom. What could that be? What sort of an animal could it be that consumes 9%?
9% of what?
The brain.
Chimpanzee.
Yes, of course, very good. Yeah, couldn't be anything else. The more normal actually is 2%. Rabbit. Many other animals. So we would die if we didn't have a specific systems to help us stop over consuming. This is a matter of credit and debit. Intake and expenditure. And this is incredibly important for human beings. That is actually the main sense that is the very most important and affects everything else. And this is this affection. And affection pervades everything we feel, we do. So what could happen is that the quota between debit and credit gets out of hand, which is something that can happen if we activate too much area in the brain. And that will be the equivalence of running several marathons, and that will deplete the system and put us into a horizontal position very quick if we don't have this system. So what is this attachment or affection, which is usually called? Well, it's a general well-being in our system. We got the energy, we feel balanced, we are working well, we are very happy, we have a lot of energy. We feel relaxed, at ease, we smile if we want to do that. We feel a great anticipation for the things we're supposed to do. And this energy pervades our whole system. And we don't feel any effort whatsoever when we do things. There's no effort in it. We don't, and this is a very good example, when we, for instance, run very hard, hardest we can, there is not an inkling of strain in our system. We do it easily, like we were sitting down. And of course you hear this is not a common thing. If you want to see a smiling person running everything he can, he has to be from Ethiopia or Somalia. And that is, of course, obvious in the Olympics. So the thinking needs to be calm. Otherwise, any overactivation will lead to depletion of energy in the system. And if this continues for too long at a low level where we still survive, we will have a change in the neural structure. So the neurons themselves will change. And they will change into neurons that don't do their job very well. And in the end, we will lose our ability to think. And the bad thing is the metabolism. Metabolism is consumption and production of energy. That's metabolism. For instance, eating a piece of bread gives you energy, and then you sort of produce energy in your system. The bloodstream transport energy to all parts of your body, and it gets consumed, used for productivity. And most of that goes to thinking. Thinking takes more than anything else. Not comparable to running 100 meters or 10 kilometers. This is much more. The energy that the brain sucks up. And what happens is we get a change in our neural structure, and we get a sort of neurons that consume, for the first, sugar. And they are quick neurons. They're quick for decision. And quick neurons are not very good for thinking, because thinking takes slowness. It has to be slower than 10 milliseconds till we have effective thinking. And now we have put the balance a bit off, not too much. So we consume more than we take in. But the system can only produce that much. It cannot be regulated by taking in more food, not always anyway, because the system has an absolute limit for how much it can actually produce sugar-wise. So what will happen now? The system goes out of harmony, and now there is a loss of homeostasis. That's the other coin of affection. Now we don't feel at ease. Now there's a general pervading feeling of our whole system that not everything is working to the optimum. And that is coming from the whole bodily system, telling you to change. This is a survival mechanism. And it's not just from the inside, it's for the whole bodily system, so to speak. You feel it in your fingers, you feel it in your thinking, you feel it in your stance, you feel it in your balance. And this feeling pervades even sleep, whatever you do. So these two things we have, this is systems that are actually something that everybody has. We were talking about emotions yesterday, and that they are very different and they're actually created by rationality. This is something calling from the whole system, and it's actually the same with all human beings. So this we do have. Even babies have it. And one big problem here is how we think. How we think becomes very, very important for how well the system works, how much energy we consume in our system. Otherwise, we run the risk of starving the brain and making it change in its activity. And this is why it's so incredibly important that the thinking processes are really working. And now we come to a very interesting thing, because this is things we covered before. We were speaking earlier about creative thinking. Creative thinking is the only thinking. The rest is repetition, so to speak. It's the same thing and it seemed to be different, but it's actually the same thing. And this you can see on a brain scan. It's very interesting. The patterns for thinking and for this repetitive move are very different indeed. And they engage different neurons. The pattern is more directed in thinking. You can actually see a direction. Whereas in this repetitive thinking, the one that has the other neurons that takes sugar is not working well, that is out of balance when we don't feel well, those don't have a direction. There's no system in that thinking. There's no direction. And there is also a more somatic side to the whole thing that's quite interesting as well. So you see here that we have an organ that can starve the body or help the body, or depending in what situation it is. And it's all down to metabolism. A thwarted metabolism is something that can cause and will cause different problems in the bodily system. Because we have come to the understanding the last 2 decades that all these different afflictions, I should say, not affections, afflictions of the body are actually in foundation metabolic. They are caused by wrong metabolism. We have cardiac problem, cardiovascular problems like cardiac arrest, defibrillation, and so forth. We have cancer. Cancer is a metabolic disease. Something we know for a longer time, maybe 30, 40 years, that's different brain problems, because the metabolism is happening in the brain. That's the area which is most vulnerable to wrong metabolism. There we have dementia and Alzheimer that is progressing incredibly much in the Western world. Alzheimer was actually quite unusual, even until the first outbreak of the First World War. Now it's very common. It's mainly a metabolic disease. And of course, here it becomes much clearer, something we know for maybe 60, 70 year diabetes. It's a metabolic syndrome. And autoimmune diseases seem to have a foundation that is caused in metabolism. And metabolic syndrome, for obvious reason. Metabolic syndrome is when you have at least 4 different things like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high blood fat value, and cardiac problem. At least 4 things. And metabolic syndrome is a big killer. Those are all the biggest killer in the Western world, and they're all metabolic. And the homeostasis is supposed to stop these things from happening. Well, actually this occurs only after years and years of a metabolic system that is not in balance, when you feel this not being at ease. Things doesn't come easy to you, and it's both a bodily feeling and it's a thinking feeling. And actually negative thinking negative of different things, is more or less a new commodity. And it's very culturally dependent. And we talked earlier when we spoke about de bono in some cases. In these cases, also, I often think it's easier to put what I read, what I learned, into the format of somebody we already know. And de Bono is one of those. And he goes to show that when you have a system that is already established, about the sandbox. The sandbox is a very static system. And today it has become very common, or it's been common for millennia actually, but in order to create something good, instead of thinking, we tend And this is a tendency we have all the way back to the ancient Greeks. I mentioned an article a couple of years ago that de Bono wrote in The Guardian, attacking negative thinking. Negative thinking is criticizing something, saying something is bad. And that was actually instigated by the Greek. And he said, the gang of the free rule the world with their negative thinking. It started out that they composed something they called truth. It's a very Western word, truth. And they had two combatants fighting each other, probably on the agora. The one winning had the truth. And in order to get the purer and purer truth, it's a bit like original, you need to criticize. And criticize, we know, does never ever produce anything better. And it's actually very Western to say something is bad, something is negative. And it does never happen in the industry, for instance, never. Because how do you better something? Well, you don't criticize, you create something new. You need a new solution. Critique will never give you a new solution. And we actually have this in a saying, rather than criticizing darkness, lit up a candle. And that is actually very, very true. But we are a bit stuck in negative thinking. Only the greatest philosophers seem to be above it, Wittgenstein and Heidegger. They never ever criticized anything. Nothing was negative for them, because it also stops understanding. By criticizing something, you'll be stuck in the shadow side of the thing you're criticizing. And this has to do with the functioning of the brain. Because when we get stuck in this negative thinking, it can actually spread, and it will spread. And it will be an idea that the world is not generally good to you, or your life is not going your way, or your wife is not treating you the way, and your office is something bad. And now, these couple of last 2 years, we have very good indication that a lot of people who are thinking the corona is bad. I don't mean it's good, but to think it's bad, you need to remember this actually has effects here. And it does not help you to stop the corona. It is oddly enough that researchers that try to stop the corona most probably don't engage in negative thinking. They try to create something new. A little bit like I mentioned earlier for my dear colleague Kalle, the bread. The bread I named after Alexander Fleming, who invented penicillin. He did not invent penicillin by criticizing the sulfa. The sulfa was the method we used to have in combating bacteria. He invented it, and all inventions are actually made the same way. And we know today all thinking is creative, something new, because otherwise you won't find a solution. Alexander Fleming could have criticized sulfa until his dying days. That wouldn't produce penicillin. You need to do something genuinely new, and you need actually an aspect of chance, or whatever you can call it. This is what de Bono called asymmetric thinking. And oddly enough, de Bono got very interesting in these things in olden age. He got very interesting in the equipment you could have, and he bought equipment to check brain functioning. And it goes to show that his thinking, asymmetric thinking, helped the brain to heal, especially brains that had been hurt, because once the brain gets hurt, it gets stiff, the neural pattern changes, and it loses its direction. And he goes to show you can actually heal the brain. It's very interesting. He is not the foremost proponent of this thing, but it's interesting he came into that idea, not only to see what sort of say asymmetric thinking could help in the world, but also to help those people who were afflicted by this stern thinking that leads to metabolic disorder. And of course, this is very, very close to philosophy, and it's no happenstance that the biggest, his greatest book, I would say, I'm right, you wrong, how to break the black and white thinking. It sounds like philosophy. And I assure you, in a way, it's not. This is actually working. But yes, it sounds like philosophy. It shares one of the regions in it. But there is a very problematic thing with this critical thinking. And of course, the other kind, critical thinking wants to establish center, truth. A truth that's unchangeable, the original if you want, not copies. Falsehood is a copy. It's, as De Bono said, it's better to be good than bad, whatever that would mean in an action situation. We need other terms. We need actually new language, as De Bono showed us. We need to use terms like working, functioning, making progress, going somewhere. You don't usually say, and cars is a good, because I'm very interested in cars, it's a good example. Well, sometimes you can say this is a better car than the other one. This is not actually how you produce cars. You invent something completely new. And criticism, as I can say, can never lead to something new. Because in a way, the thing you criticize will define you. So if you say this is bad, you will create this, which is the reverse of the thing you're criticizing. And this is down to logic, more or less. And this is very problematic. And this was exactly what De Bono was criticizing. Although he didn't know at the time, this actually is very problematic to our health as well. This is actually the biggest health problem we have. He later learned that, but it's very interesting how these developments run parallel. And there's also the philosophers that we took interest in, Heidegger and Wittgenstein, without a doubt, were also in that legion. They hugely criticized all ideas of truth, and this idiosyncratic one truth idea, which is so damaging. It's a little bit, you stand with a car nobody can use and you shout to people, this is the truth. This car is true. I constructed this car by criticizing all the cars. How can you criticize me? I did the Greek thinking here. I criticized everything. This should be perfect. I found the true car. Can you drive it? No, you cannot. What holds for a car holds for everything else. And it's not just about the future, it's actually about the past. I mentioned a friend of mine who used Wittgenstein for history. And the thing, by criticizing, you can never understand the past. You get stuck in the present. Because if you criticizing a historical idea, that is done in the present. Then you never reach the past. The past is as it is. Criticizing a version of the past in this now, that makes history a modern thing, like a modernity, nothing to do with history. And that was his conclusion. He realized that modern history to 80–90% is just a reflection of modern society. It has nothing to do with anything being past or it happened. Well, I had to agree that because I remember history in the 70s. I'm not that old actually, I grew up in the 70s, but the literature was still prominent when in the 80s I read history. And you could read, this was the hippie movement of history. For some mad reasons, medieval people were long-haired, there were hippies, they smoked marijuana, they revolted against the regime. We even had a history program for children that was excellent, it was very good, but it was all about fighting the big boss. This was leftist drama at the highest level. And I think they went into an old Mora clock. You walked into it and you get back into history. That was actually quite excellent. And then you ended up in the Viking Age, the medieval time, the Renaissance. And in all those ages, you tried to fight the bad guy, the capitalist. I had a feeling already then, this is not historical anymore. And my friend Torsten, he realized all the history he read, it was just about the 1990s and the 2000s. It had zero to do with history that actually happened. Although this TV show he remembered as well, it was very good, but it had nothing to do with the past. Nobody was fighting feudal lords in Sweden at that time. It's just make up to fit the modern times. But that goes to illustrate that the thinking no longer works. For thinking to be working, it must have some sort of accuracy. And that's another side. When the thinking go down, when we don't have homeostasis, we cannot predict the future. We can't even know what's good, because the whole system goes down. You see, it's not only the brain as a bodily process, like consuming loads of energy, it's also the brain as a guidance, to guide our life. And if the brain is not working, the thinking won't be good as well, either. And this is so obvious in brain scans. You can actually see very clear this is not good thinking. It doesn't matter what the person produces, you know the thinking can't be good anyway. And this is because the brain partly is something of nature. We can now see when it works and not works. And it's actually the very same as a muscle. We can see if a muscle is inflamed, and you can see a body that's diseased with Parkinson, for instance. So you know that that person won't be have a very easy life moving about. We can see the same thing with the brain. We can see non-thinking today. We know exactly how it looks like. And oddly enough, it's very parallel to the description of the Bono. I like that. And we are closing the year here now. There are not many days left. But he really deserves a celebration, de Bono, because he was a gigant when it came to new thinking, or questioning things that were, so to speak, never questioned before, like the foundation and the idea that the truth will set you free. The truth is out there, as they say in the X-Files. I don't know if you remember that TV series, but I would say that TV series never ever came to a conclusion. I think it was like 5 seasons. That was partly the charm of it. You never got to the truth. It was just new things coming up all the time. But if it wouldn't have been a TV series, if it's real life, if it's this lack of homeostasis, then you will never get to the important stuff in life. You never succeed because your brain is not working. It cannot make the right decisions for you. You are your brain in a certain way. And I think now it's clearer why this homeostasis is so important. It's a general bodily field, the whole system, and it's a general field of everything is working perfect. You feel the energy in every little cell of your body. There is no strain in whatever you do. You don't feel strain. And this is, of course, not the regular perception of modern West man, but it used to be it, and it's still the perception in many cultures. And negative thinking doesn't exist in, for instance, the culture in Korea. People don't use negative thinking. There's no criticism. It's just how to find out new solutions. And they use that in their personal life. And there's no wonder their homeostasis and their much lower levels of these horrible factors is astounding. And I think the healthiest place on earth, the Okinawa Islands, you have even lesser. I think we have 1/5 of the cancer numbers. And they have an excellent brain health there. Negative thinking doesn't exist. There's no criticism of anything. Instead, you do something different. And they are renowned to be very quick in their actions as well. I might add that I don't think there is a chance, but Okinawa is actually the place where karate developed. The empty hand, it's called, and that's pretty effective. That's not much criticizing, it's about doing things. Well, I think I round up that. It was an introduction to this very interesting metabolic system, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.